Scary movies don't create fears, they release them. This is the No Fear Podcast. We know what scares you. I'm Matt.
I'm Mel,
And I'm Lisa.
and this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. Join us as we start a brand new series where we get very meta about horror movies.
All right. We are talking about movies and movies about or books about movies. So yeah, we are getting very meta, as Mel said, for this what we're calling the "Let's All Go to the Movies" series for the No Fear cast. So the opening quotation that Matt read us is from horror director Wes Craven. It was attributed to him in a Guardian interview with writer Mark Kermode. Scary movies don't create fears, they release them. And we've done found footage before. That was way back in season 6. But this is actually looking at the act of filmmaking itself. And full disclosure, we got this idea after our last episode where we were talking about Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones, because that takes place largely, at least in part, at a movie theater. It involves the act of watching a movie. In this case, it's a prank at a movie theater. And it comments upon movies and the act of filmmaking and horror films in general. In particular, is looking at the serial killer film, so the slasher trope and the final girl and all of that is kind of mixed into that book. So we thought, why not look at some other books and movies in the horror genre that are doing kind of the same thing, that are aware of the horror movie, that are aware of people, kind of making films and just generally loving films. And so yeah, that's what this series is about. As always, we're going to start off with this episode really kind of doing a dive into why this would be something that would be appealing for the horror genre, why in particular movies in the movie theater can be a place that is ripe for horror. And we're also going to do a little bit of a history into this because, of course, even though we love Stephen Graham Jones, he's not the first person to have, set a book in a movie theater or to have really done some sort of meta commentary on the horror genre. So, like I said, we've done found footage before. This is going to be slightly different. So there may be I think there's going to be a few overlaps in this, but it is talking about something different. So this isn't necessarily a look at, where we're watching something that is, an uncovered object like a film, and we're seeing the horror unfold on screen. This is more people who are interacting with that. So I thought we would just start as we normally do with a why is this scary? And we could look in particular. Well, really, we're dealing with two things here. Like, why is the movie theater itself a kind of scary place? Or can it be a scary place? Um, and why are movies themselves, like as objects, scary? Um, so I don't know. Who wants to start off with their general thoughts on why this may be an interesting place to set a horror story?
I'll take the dive. So I think One thing, and I've been thinking about this since we first came up with this idea, as all good topics do. That it's been percolating in the back of my mind for weeks now. And honestly, I think one thing about films that lends itself to scariness and horror is the act itself of watching it. And I'm speaking specifically about the the film going, like the theater going experience, but even when you're at home watching something, you usually turn the lights off and watch the movie. But it's a particularly, you're in a public space, you're among other people. People often go to movies with a group of friends, but during the duration of it, you're completely isolated if you're doing it right. I mean, if you're being a jerk and talking and not paying attention to the movie, that's one thing. But if you're actually there to like watch the movie, your focus is zoned in, locked in completely on that movie. And part of where I'm going with this is a scene from Night of the Mannequin we didn't really talk about, is one of the murders gets committed in a movie theater, and it's he he's able to commit the murder without really attracting attention. It's not until after he's killed the person that people even realize what he's done. And that really struck a chord with me because I love going to movies. I love the theater going experience. I haven't done it a lot lately since COVID, which lately, that was 6 years ago now, but still feels lately. Uh, but but I think that that aspect of giving it your full attention, even in this crowded public place, there's something about that, I mean, I know a lot of people, especially in the early days of Hollywood, feared things like subliminal messages being put into movies and TV, and I think that's been mostly disproven these days. But I mean, it does kind of put you in that sort of trance-like state if you're in the dark room, the the screen fills your entire field of vision, the sound, especially since surround sound is, I mean, it's very loud, it's all around you. It's I mean, it's almost like a mild hypnotic state if you're really locked in and paying attention to the movie. And I think there's something in there that, I mean, you're vulnerable in mentally or even somewhat physically in a way that, I think people aren't usually that level of vulnerable in public spaces.
Yeah, Matt, when I've been thinking about this for the last few days, I've been thinking very similar things because, you know, I think I enjoy going to watch movies. I probably don't go as much post the pandemic as I did before, but I've gotten back into going. And part of the reason I like going to see a movie, whether it's with other people or just by myself, I kind of like just going by myself and getting a bunch of popcorn and sitting there in the dark and watching a movie, right? I'm not looking at my email. I have my phone off. Nobody's bothering me. And I think, it the comfort for me in a way. I got this time and I'm just immersing myself in this. I'm not going to be like, oh, who's that? I'm going to look it up on IMDb like I do on my phone if I'm watching something at home. It's like this one of the few spaces I think where we can kind of retreat into this dark place and like interact with a movie. But one of the things I kept thinking about while I was thinking about this is that even though movies can be nostalgic for us, we think back on movies we saw when we were kids, or we think back on movies we're glad we saw in a theater, that we wouldn't have been able to see otherwise. Like, I'm happy that I saw Casablanca in a theater at some point, so I remember that. So these moments in time, and they're also a way for us to kind of shut ourselves off for a little bit and immerse ourselves in another world. But there is that vulnerability. And I thought of the exact same kind of scene where one of the murders takes place in the theater. Um, I also thought of like, just if you're in a theater and it's dark, you can feel like you're immersed in the movie and almost like you're alone, or you can almost feel like you're joining with the audience because you're all having similar reactions to what you're watching. But there's also a vulnerability in that you don't know who could come in from the outside and what intentions they may have, which is also kind of scary, especially kind of in the world that we live in now. Um, I was also thinking about the drive-in movie scene from Night of the Mannequins, which kind of reminded me a little bit of Twister when the people are watching the movie and the tornado comes from behind and just starts tearing everything up. There's also that idea too that anything could be happening outside of your kind of experience with the movie too. Like you're distracted and you're kind of shut away in this place, but there's still something going on the outside, which I think is kind of fascinating as well. Like I remember seeing a movie a long time ago, and a really terrible storm happened outside the theater, and we didn't even know anything about it because we were just watching the movie. We didn't realize what had happened until the movie just stopped, and we were literally in darkness, and there was no bringing the lights back on. And they came and got us out of the theater with flashlights, and we were fine. But it was a pretty severe storm, and it was like we were just so wrapped up in the movie with the sound, and we had no idea what was going on in the outside world. So I think when you get in that kind of immersive space, you're just in it for however long the movie's going. You're not thinking about what's going on outside. Hopefully, you're not talking on your phone, like you were saying. Um, all of those aspects. So I think when the outside world kind of breaks into that, or if someone comes in with nefarious purposes, that can be really scary. And then, like you were saying, I mean, I think the making of movies themselves, like in a meta way, can also be scary. The idea of like, can there be a liminal space or an interaction between ourselves and art or performance? Um, and yeah, I mean, I'm going to toss it back to you, Lisa, for your impressions. But I think there's a reason why we have this like, what's what I'm looking for, like myths about cursed films where everybody passed away right afterward, or whatever. Like there's this kind of idea of the making of the art itself. There could be something about it that could be dangerous or could be a vehicle for something. And I know that's kind of vague, and we'll be talking about more specific examples to come, listeners. But just in general, those are just some of my thoughts. Like Matt was saying, the vulnerability, the kind of anything could come in from the external side. But then also, yeah, just the meta idea of the movie itself and the experience and what that could mean.
Yeah, I think everything that you both are saying is really spot on with things that I was thinking about. I mean, movies are meant to be, especially as we pointed out in the theater, a completely immersive experience, and you are cut off from the outside world, which is a source of comfort. I go to the movies a lot. I think I always laugh because I say I'm single-handedly trying to keep my local theater open because um, I'll go quite a lot because I'm terrified that it's gonna not last. But when you think about that, it's kind of a comfort where you can be completely immersed in something and you don't have to think about your outside worries. But as you've pointed out, um, there's also an anxiety that comes along with not knowing what is happening in the outside world. There was a movie that I thought about. I think I might have mentioned it on this podcast before, but there's a Joe Dante film from 1993 called Matinee that stars John Goodman as I mean, he's very much like a William Castle like filmmaker, and he's going around to theaters to set up. I think if I remember right, the film that he's showing is called Mant, and it's like half man, half ant. So Mant. And he is going around and he's putting like buzzers in the seats. Like he's setting them up so that people will get like shocked in the middle of the movie. Again, a very like William Castle type stunt, spectacular, as part of his movies. But this one in particular, so it takes place in the 60s and it's in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis. When this movie takes place, and it takes place in Florida. Um And there's a lot of scenes in the theater, but then there's like a misunderstanding that happens in the theater where some of the teenagers think that like basically that Cuba has sent a missile over and that now the end of the world is happening, but really it's just a misunderstanding of what is happening in the movie itself, and it becomes that like interactive experience. And so I think about that a lot. And that's not this movie isn't um a horror movie per se, but it deals a lot with it. And then I also think, and Matt, I was thinking about what you were talking about when you brought up the fact that in Stephen Graham Jones's book, there is a murder in a theater. And probably the most, if we're going to talk about like horror movies that go meta and have commentary on the genre itself, I think we can't not talk about Scream and those movies. I mean, because what happens over the course of Scream 1 becomes Stab in the later movies, and in Scream 2 there are deaths in a Stab um showing. It's I'm getting my trying to keep Scream and Stab straight here, but you have that kind of, again, the kind of spectacle in a movie theater of people not understanding what is performance and what is not. I think there's also some deaths that happen in Scream 2, but also in some of the later Scream films that happen on a stage, like with the theater performance. And so it's that same thing again, but that this idea that because we are somehow primed to watch a death and to watch blood and gore because we're engaging in a horror film, that we will somehow not be able to see it when it happens in front of us. Like that there's a kind of like chaotic moment of, if you see somebody running around and saying that they're bleeding or that they're hurt, at the same time you see multiple people running around dressed like a killer and everybody thinks it's all fun and games, that person isn't going to get the help that they need. And I remember, for being a sequel, I remember those deaths in the movie theater in particular in Scream 2 being kind of eerie. Having that experience of watching that, especially there's one guy who I think it's a guy, the guy who is stabbed in the bathroom stall when he hears something and he puts his ear up against it and ends up getting a knife into his ear. Um, but I think about that a lot, because it's just like it's that experience of watching that on the screen and then leaving and going to the bathroom in the movie theater and you're just thinking, "Oh yeah, I just watched somebody die in this particular moment." So I think it adds that level of movies themselves kind of being a scary place. I also want to throw out something that I've heard a little bit more now, but I also remember hearing when I was younger. Um, and we've talked about this a bit on the podcast, but I grew up in the 80s and 90s in the South, in the Bible Belt, in an evangelical Christian community, and satanic panic was a real thing in my life growing up. And I remember people telling me to be careful what I watched because it could invite like evil through whatever like medium you're watching. And I've heard similar things recently because we are kind of in the midst of a mini, I guess, satanic panic now, that horror movies in particular and horror TV shows and things like that can invite demonic activity into your home, which just adds a whole other level. I guess if that's true, I may be one of the most demonically possessed people around, but I don't know. Have y'all ever heard that? This idea that like movies can somehow be a portal to letting things come in?
Yeah.
I have, yes. Especially, I feel like somebody was talking about a similar thing. Like if you watch a movie where there's like somebody using a Ouija board in it, that's like really dangerous and bad. I guess it's a portal within a portal or something. But during the Satanic Panic, I either just wasn't paying attention or I wasn't around people who were saying things like that. But in the last like recently, yes, I have I've heard people talk about that idea. So I'm sorry, Lisa, that your house is infested with demons.
It
I've probably got a
truly.
couple in mind, especially if they come out of books too, because then I'm done for.
Well, I do think that is a perfect segue, Mel, bringing up maybe if books are portals, um, looking at kind of the history of this, of where did this like really come from in some of the earliest examples. And Mel, I know you found some when you were kind of looking through this, and we'll talk about the movies, which I think really, I mentioned Scream already, but there are a few others that deal with um somehow, especially this idea that movies might be portals for something if you want to look at them as like cursed objects, but also just how we interact with watching these things. But before we get there, I'm going to really start with what I think might be the earliest. And the thing that I really pinpointed, now there may be some earlier ones, but just in my limited research, was Robert Chambers' The King in Yellow. So that was in 1895. And that was one of, and when I say it's the earliest, I'm thinking it's one of the ones where you really have something that can be like, it's dealing with how we consume media. I did think, I'm not talking about curse like artwork or anything like that, because that goes back further and you could probably make an argument that that was leading up to this. But in Chambers the King in Yellow, it's about a play that nobody really knows what's in the play, because when you read the play, you end up going mad. Lovecraft would later use this as a basis for his 1927 story Pickman's Model, which again is this idea of art and reality melding together, um, with the idea that this is going to, like, by reading something, you're going to go insane, which again, I think kind of ties into this idea of losing yourself to a story, or losing yourself to a movie in particular. But in this case, it's a play, not a movie, in The King in Yellow. And The King in Yellow pops up a lot. Even I can think of recent things where it's been referenced. So I'm trying to think, what was the oh, I'm not going to remember. My brain is dead right now. But the oh gosh, the cops investigating the murders
True
and
Detectives.
True Detective. Thank
Yeah.
you. I was like, it's
You're
right
welcome.
on the tip of my tongue, and it just poofed, went away. But yeah, it brings in a lot of these ideas. Of course, then you have something like M.R. James's The Mezzotent in 1904. Mel, you had mentioned 1925's Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah, the first thing I thought of when I was looking at your list was the mezzotint, which is it's not a performance, but it is like art melding with reality because it's a kind of old timey monochrome print, like early photography that is kind of haunted. Like things happen on it, and people basically watch it. They're haunted by watching this kind of terrible event happen over and over again in the picture. But yeah, I was just looking to see, because like you said, I'm sure these ideas of cursed images and artwork go back. I was trying to find earlier movies because I was curious. And I was like, I just thought, the Phantom of the Opera. I kind of hit myself in the forehead because I mean, that's right, a haunted opera house. And there are like operatic performances in it, that the Phantom is at. So again, you have um a performance and there's connections to the performance in that tie into the film. So I don't know if it's a perfect example, but I thought it'd be interesting to throw a silent film in there and a classic Universal monster film to boot.
Yeah, it is. And the play itself, or the musical, I guess, if you want to get technical, Phantom of the Opera, that's also kind of a very meta experience because it involves the audience in participating in it. Because, of course, it's got the very famous, I'm talking about like the one from the 80s, the very famous, like, if you're sitting in the audience, the chandelier drops and falls from the ceiling. That's the one of the theatrical tricks that they do. So it is this idea of you're watching a musical that is about an opera, and you're seeing the phantom through that. So I mean, I think you could make that case. I want to fast forward us in time. I know I'm making a big jump because we were just talking about the late 1800s, early 1900s, but I want to push us forward all the way through. And I know I'm jumping over a lot, but to the 90s in particular. And the reason I want to focus on the 1990s is because in our upcoming episodes, we're going to be talking about Sylvia Morena Garcia's Silver Nitrate and Paul Tremblay's horror movie. And both of those deal with this idea of a film as a cursed object in some sort of way, whether it's like the watching of it or the making of it, and how people interact with finding that film or watching that film. And they both have connections to the 90s. So I thought it would be kind of interesting to look at what was happening in the 90s in this time period. And there was a lot, particularly with the explosion of the internet, because you could find a lot of films that you weren't able to access before. So prior, I would say prior to the 90s, you might hear about films, but you weren't able to just go out and watch them. If it wasn't available at your local video store, or it wasn't showing at your local movie theater, or you weren't lucky enough to have like a copy, either that you had purchased or that somebody had passed on to you, you could maybe read about it or you could hear about it. Or if it happened to like rerun on TV, if you got really lucky. So there were films that people would talk about quite a bit that they had never seen before. One of those being talking about like early horror films, talking about the movie Freaks, about the carnival. And that one was not readily available to it, but people knew about it and people talked about it. And it almost gained like a legend of its in and of itself before it became readily available. But I think with the internet culture growing, um, we started to see more people finding these films and being able to watch them and share them in a way that hadn't happened before. So I think it makes sense that some of these are taking place in the 90s. I think a lot about, in particular, like I mentioned, Freaks, of course, but another one was Faces of Death. And I bring that one up because they're remaking, rebooting that. There's a Faces of Death coming out, and that one was kind of that was another VHS that was kind of like sneakily passed around because people were saying that it was real snuff films, that you were going to really watch people die. um and of course, in this new movie, that's not quite the case. They're bringing on the idea of lore but making it into a fictional movie. But there was again this like culture of the movies you were only really supposed to whisper about. And so then that started working its way into the filmmaking, where you had a kind of meta experience like we've been talking about. So one of the first ones was 1994's In the Mouth of Madness. Again, that's like a throwback to Lovecraft and Pickman. That's where you have a writer and a cursed book. Um, it's directed by John Carpenter, starring Sam Neill. Sam Neill is the writer who, um, the cursed book is like published and adapted to film, and then he's driven to insanity. It's been a long time since I've watched that, so I may be butchering the plot there. Um, but 1998 Ringu is probably one of the most well-known ones, based on the 1991 novel by Koji Suzuki. It became The Ring in the United States in 2002, and that one, of course, is about a cursed VHS, and you pass along the curse by showing the VHS to other people. So that's bringing up this idea that the viewer is becoming interactive. And in that one in particular, where I want to point that out is like Robert Chambers, The King in Yellow. They tell you, they set up, okay, this is a cursed film, and then they show you the film. So the idea is that, okay, well, now I guess we're cursed because we sat and watched it too. It was kind of the same way in The King in Yellow. It's we're going to reference this play, and then we're going to make you read parts of it. So this idea of it's like a cooperative experience. Same thing in 2012 Sinister. Once you watch, you're cursed. That also happens in still more recently. There were two films that stood out to me. 2018's 2018's Antrim, which is a mockumentary about a cursed videotape. Uh, it's this idea that I think it's supposed to be a videotape that was made in like the 70s or the 80s that was only showed a few times because every time it was shown, something bad happened. Like, for instance, the whole movie theater burned down and a bunch of people died. So it was only shown twice. But this is like a documentary where they're trying to find it and they're talking about it, but then they show it to you. Incantation is a Taiwanese horror movie that came out a few years ago in 2022. And this is technically found footage, but I think it does kind of fit with this because it encourages the viewers to take part. So basically it tells you like, hey, we need your help. Say this incantation with us. And then you find out that you've now taken part in a curse. So like the whole movie is kind of like one big long, I'm cursing you by watching this. And I thought that those were kind of really interesting things. But again, I think what was happening around the 90s is maybe the most concentrated that I saw on this timeline. And again, I think it is because of internet culture, like building up lore around so-called forbidden movies. There are two more things I want to point out just kind of as a call out because I liked them. And that's the first season of Channel Zero on Sci-Fi, which deals with a TV show called Candle Cove. And then we've talked about this one, I think, on the podcast before in the past. James Shinburn's I Saw the TV Glow, which is about, again, this idea of community built around watching a television show, particularly like a young adult, kind of older kid TV show, and then what happens after that. So I don't know. There is quite a heavy history, I think, of these, if you want to call them like meta movie verses or these movies about movies or books about movies that encourage the reader or viewer to take part in it. I don't know. Have you seen any of these guys, or do you have anything to add? Because I know I ran through that list rather quickly.
I don't think I have anything to add. I think that was a pretty good summation, to be honest.
All right. Well, um, yeah, I guess with that, then maybe we'll start wrapping this up. Like I said, this was just our introduction. We're going to be talking about Sylvia Moreno Garcia's Silver Nitrate and also Paul Tremblay's horror movie. Maybe possibly if I can persuade Matt or Mel to watch one of these movies, maybe we'll continue it on. I don't know, but we will be talking about those two books. If you've watched any of these films and you have something to add, or maybe if I missed one of your favorites, please let us know. We are online and We love to hear from you guys. So we're at No Fear Cast, mainly on Instagram, but we do have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon. There is a lot of episodes, mini episodes as we call them, where we do deeper dives into some of these subjects. So there's a lot to dig through. But we also have merchandise available on our website. That's nofearcast.com. Remember, that is no fear, KNOW. Or you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free, but it does help other listeners find us. The music is by Nicholas Gasparini. We will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.